The last king of Rome, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, was so cruel that after he was ousted in 509 BCE, Brutus made people swear an oath to never again let one man rule the city. This is known as the Oath of Brutus, and it will play a decisive role in the downfall of the late Republic. Two new offices were created to replace the king, Rex Sacrorum and the consul. Rex Sacrorum, or the king of sacrifice, inherited all religious duties previously held by the king. To stop the Rex Sacrorum from threatening newfound liberty, he was made subordinate to the Pontifex Maximus. All military and political power of the king was now held by two consuls. Although they wielded the same powers as the king, the Romans could sleep soundly at night, knowing that the office was limited to a one-year term, and after it expired, all the legal weight could be brought down on the consul who abused his power. Consuls were elected by the Comitia Centuriata and took power on the 1st of January. The first consul, meaning the one who got more votes, was the first to hold the fasces. Fasces represented imperium, or the power to command. It alternated between the consuls each month, and the one holding it was in charge. Duties of the consuls included introducing new bills to the Senate, leading the armies in times of war, and overseeing elections. One check of power that the Romans added was the consular veto, and in Rome veto was final. The first consuls of Rome were the ringleaders of the rebellion, Lucius Junius Brutus and Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus. The Romans, still wary of the Tarquin dynasty, feared for their newly acquired freedom. Whispered hints turned into common talk as people grew increasingly more suspicious. To ease the people, Brutus summoned an assembly and pleaded with Collatinus to step down. Although shocked by this betrayal, Collatinus agreed to lay down his consulship and leave the city. In his place, the Comitia Centuriata elected Publius Valerius, another leader of the rebellion, who would later be known as Publicola. Although most of the population was content with the new leadership, a number of young nobles who enjoyed the former king's generosity wanted him back on the throne. Tarquin's envoys arrived at the city to retrieve his belongings. While the Senate was discussing the matter, they plotted with unsatisfied nobles. A slave overheard their conversation and reported it to the consuls. The traitors were imprisoned, but the envoys were sent home unharmed as they were protected by international law. Among the traitors were Titus and Tiberius, sons of consul Brutus. Punishment for treason was death, but one of the senators proposed banishment. Brutus would have none of this. He had no mercy for his sons, and they were executed alongside their co-conspirators. The slave who revealed the plot was freed and given Roman citizenship. When Tarquinius caught wind of the events that unfolded in Rome, he implored the Etruscan kings to crush the rebellion and prevent the revolution from spreading north. Two cities answered, his hometown Tarquinia and the city of Veii, who fought and lost previous wars with Rome. With these two armies trailing him, Tarquinius entered Roman territory. Roman consuls marched out to meet him, with Publius leading the infantry and Brutus the cavalry. Fighting was fierce as the two forces were evenly matched, but when the night fell, the Etruscans retreated to their home, leaving Rome as the victor. Although the battle was won, there was no celebration in the Roman camp. Lucius Junius Brutus, the father of the Republic, lay dead on the battlefield. His body was carried back to Rome and the state declared an entire year of mourning. Publius, now standing alone, fell under suspicion. He was building a home atop Velia, a hill connected to the Palatine. The paranoid masses feared that he was building a fortress from which he could imprison them all. Publius caught wind of this and summoned an assembly. Furious with the people, he said, "Am I, the most determined foe of kings, to dread the suspicion of desiring to be one myself? The house of Publius Valerius shall be no check upon your freedom. Your Velia shall be safe. I will not only move my house to the level ground, but I will move it to the bottom of the hill, that you may dwell above the citizen whom you suspect. Let those who are regarded as truer friends of liberty than Publius Valerius dwell on Velia." With this, he moved his house to the very bottom of the hill. He used this opportunity to propose two new laws that are famous even to this day. The first stated that any man who tried to make himself king could be killed by anyone without the fear of reprisal. The other gave the power of appeal to the assembly. This earned him the honorary title Publicola, meaning friend of the people. A vote to replace Brutus was held, and Spurius Lucretius, the fourth and final leader of the rebellion, was elected consul, but he died of old age only a few days later. In his place, Marcus Horatius Pulvillus was elected, and thus the first year of the Republic came to an end. We should pause this story here to examine this early Republic. The date of the foundation of 509 BC is highly suspect. It is generally believed it was fabricated by later Romans to predate the establishment of Athenian democracy just 1 year later. The Romans had a hard time believing they were not the first and best at everything, but the lack of any primary sources forces us to mark our own story with this date. Although Romans took much pride in their democracy, it should be noted that it wasn't much more than an oligarchy, ruled by the wealthy elite. Equites and the first class still held the majority of votes in the Comitia Centuriata, and they almost exclusively consisted of patricians. It wouldn't take long for the disenfranchised plebs to demand a greater voice in the government. It was this dichotomy that was the source of internal strife for the duration of the Republic. The majority of the population didn't have even nominal political standing, namely women, immigrants, and slaves. At this time, most Romans were settled farmers, but the lands they worked were owned by the rich minority. Although important, slaves were not yet the backbone of the Roman economy as they would become in the time of the late Republic and the Empire. Romans cultivated grain for internal consumption, or grapes and olives used to manufacture wine and oil, which were valuable trade goods. Following the Etruscan example, wealthy Romans used these goods to enrich themselves even further by trading with neighboring nations. Even though Rome had many internal struggles, in times of war they were all set aside, and the Romans banded together to defend the city, only to resume their quarrels when the danger had passed. Having said this, we should continue with our story. After his defeat, Tarquinius fled north and took refuge in the Etruscan city of Clusium, ruled by King Lars Porsena. Tarquinius used the same tactic he used in Veii and persuaded Porsena to march on Rome. Such was the power of Clusium and the reputation of Porsena that general panic ensued in Rome. The Senate feared the plebs would be so overcome with despair that they would let Tarquinius into the city and accept peace even though it meant slavery. The plebs were exempt from paying harbor dues and war tax, so that all expenditures would fall on the rich who could bear the burden. This generous act ensured harmony in the dark days to come. Livy writes that the popularity of the Senate at this time was never surpassed by any man or institution in Rome. As the Clusian armies drew near, Romans abandoned their posts and fled across the Tiber, leaving the Sublician bridge unguarded. This would have spelled disaster for Rome, if it wasn't for the bravery of Horatius Cocles. He ordered the men behind him to tear down the bridge. To buy them enough time, he stood alone on the far side of the river and challenged the whole of Porsena's army to combat. The army was transfixed as they watched this brave but obviously suicidal man. It was only the sound of the collapsing bridge that snapped the army out of their trance. As Porsena's army was charging at him, he called upon the god of Tiber, and still fully armed, jumped into the river. Although Etruscans hurled many spears at him, he reached the other shore safely. For his actions, Horatius was admitted to the pantheon of Roman heroes. By collapsing the bridge, they stopped Porsena from directly assaulting the city, forcing him into a lengthy siege. Ambushes set up by Publius stopped Etruscan ravaging parties from plundering Roman fields. But the city was still blockaded and the people starving. In this time of great need, another hero of the early Republic emerged. Young noble Mucius Scaevola disguised himself in Etruscan clothes and swam across the Tiber. He entered Porsena's camp unnoticed and hid among the crowd. It was the soldiers' payday and the king's treasurer was handing out the gold. Mucius did not know the king by sight, as he and his entourage were dressed alike. Hoping that the good fortune that led him this far would continue, Mucius struck a killing blow. Unfortunately, he killed the treasurer and not the king. He was apprehended and brought before the king. Mucius told him that Romans didn't declare war on Clusium, but on King Porsena himself. Enraged, Porsena ordered his men to burn him alive. In an act of defiance, Mucius plunged his right hand into the fire and without flinching stood there while his arm burned. The king, astonished by his bravery, decided to set him free. Feigning gratitude for sparing his life, Mucius tricked Porsena into thinking he was just the first of the 300 Romans that swore an oath to assassinate him. Fearful for his life, Porsena lifted the siege and marched back home. This is the official legend the Romans told themselves, but historical evidence tells a different story. Lars Porsena is a documented historical figure, but it's highly unlikely that he attacked Rome at the request of Tarquinius Superbus. In the 500s BCE, Volscians settled the lowlands southeast of Rome and disrupted trade routes connecting Etruria and Magna Graecia. Wanting more control in that area, Porsena besieged Rome, and contrary to the Roman legends, he was successful. He left his son in charge and returned to Clusium. His son, wanting to expand his influence, waged war against Rome's neighbors. He was defeated by the Latin League and expelled from Rome. This left Rome in a peculiar position. Latin cities that were supposedly subordinate to Rome defeated the enemy that Rome itself couldn't. Those same Latins, believing that Rome, weakened by occupation, would be easy pickings, revolted, but they underestimated Roman power, like so many others did throughout history. The Senate appointed Aulus Postumius as dictator. In Rome, the office of dictator was an extreme measure used for desperate situations. He held absolute power and could do as he saw fit without the need of approval from the consuls or the Senate. When appointed, the dictator chose his master of the horse, who was second in command, and answered only to him. Dictators were appointed for 6-month terms, and after it expired, they had to give power back to the consuls. And they did. Every dictator until Julius Caesar gave up his power willingly. Postumius led the Roman army to victory at the Battle of Lake Regillus. This victory assured Roman dominance over the Latins for the next 150 years. When he returned to Rome, he stepped down from his position and reinstated the consuls. The monarchy really was dead, and it would stay dead for another 500 years. While fighting to defend the Republic, a large number of plebeians were left in debt. This debt would be the source of internal turmoil for the years to come, and it will take the first strike in recorded history to resolve it. Join us next time as we discuss this struggle, known as the conflict of the orders, that will define internal politics of the early Republic.